Bing bong. I am live with another edition of the State of Bitcoin podcast. But fucking had the YouTube up. My bad. But I'd like to thank everybody streaming me sats. I didn't get any boosts, but I did get a few sats streamed from Aquila, I think is how you say it on Fountain. So I do deeply appreciate that. The boosts and the sats streamed are always greatly appreciated. So thank you for everybody doing all that. And first, special shout out to Bitcoin Bay. So if you're in Tampa Bay, I'm recording this on Thursday, the 20th. We have a workshop for all businesses on the 23rd. I'm posting the Eventbrite in the link in the show notes. So if you're listening to this before then and you're in the area and you want to go, feel free to go. They're breaking down everything that comes with running a business on Bitcoin, whether that's accounting, how to receive Bitcoin, taxes, all that great kind of stuff, storage, and all great kind of stuff. Lunch will be provided, so be sure to check that out. And then shout out to my sponsors, Bitcoin Miami. The prices go up tomorrow. So if you're listening to this, you better get on those tickets fast for the biggest Bitcoin conference in the country, Bitcoin Miami, Bitcoin 2023. It's less than a month away at this point. You can use promo code Green Candle to get 10% off your entire order, whether that's an industry pass, whale pass, or just general admin. Save that 10% and use that 10% to get more sats. I mean, we're getting a nice, easy price here. And then when you get those sats, after you buy that Bitcoin Miami ticket and you save with 10% using promo code Green Candle, go to coddle.co and buy a punch plate. Use that punch plate to store your seed phrase so you never lose it in a fire. It's been battle tested through the thick and thin. So use those punch plates. And lastly, for everybody listening on audio or video, if you're listening on YouTube, hit the like button for me and help boost that algo, or hit the subscribe, help the channel out. It helps me bring in great guests. Like I have one waiting here. My good friend, I don't know, I think this might be your first State of Bitcoin appearance, but SB from the Woke Antidote. SB, how you doing today, man?
Yo, what's going on? Yeah, maybe I was on a macro show or a Sunday Scary, so I'm definitely down to switch it up and talk some corn. I love talking corn.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is your first one without the chat. You know, we've had the big chat one where we had, Joey, Gandalf, Len, and you all on one. But I think this was the first one where we got solo for you on the Bitcoin podcast. So if they haven't caught the chat episode, or they haven't caught the Macro Insights episode with you, and TB, I believe, is on there too. Tell us a little bit about who you are, and then we'll dive right into it.
Yeah, so the concept of the Woke Antidote podcast is basically breaking down what me and my co-host TB, he's tech bro, I'm stocks bro, what we see is this crazy ass world out there that's gone woke and seems to be getting crazier every single day. Part of that is fiat nonsense, which is why we both like Bitcoin. We've been advocating it for years. We've talked about it a lot on the show. And then for me specifically, I work in finance, so I'm familiar with a lot of this stuff. I would say for Bitcoin, the more that I've learned about the current monetary system we're in, the more I think it's absolutely bonkers, insane, and needs to be replaced with something. And that's part of the big reason why I love Bitcoin so much. So yeah, so I love getting into it, talking about this, and I think I have some insight potentially that others might not have, because I am in the system but don't like the system and like Bitcoin, which is, I think, somewhat of a rarity. But we can talk about that later if needed.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I get it on both sides, right? So, I mean, I talk to a lot of FinTwit guys and I talk to a lot of Bitcoiners, and there isn't really too many that are kind of in the middle like yourself. So I think like you said, yeah, you bring a great perspective when it comes to a lot of things. So the reason I brought you on here is we had you on a Spaces earlier, maybe last week or the week before. And one of the people that was listening said that they haven't heard anybody break down MicroStrategy like you have. So, when it comes to FinTwit and Bitcoin Twitter, it's a very controversial company. Michael Saylor always seems to be buying Bitcoin and putting it on the balance sheet. and some have mixed opinions on that, and the strategies that he's using. But yeah, why don't you break it all down? Let's hear. How do you think MicroStrategy is doing so far, and what do you think of I guess their current balance sheet status?
Yeah, so I think the first main thing to realize about MicroStrategy is they have bought a lot of Bitcoin with debt. So I think there's very much a you can have an opinion on which way you want to go with whether you like that or not. And because he had that first tranche, I think around 500 million, bought it at 10,000 in Bitcoin, and that clearly was an epic trade, right? Because we're seeing it way far there. But the reason that he had the 500 million in the first place was because the company was making money for several years, if not over a decade. So they were collecting all this free cash flow they had produced, and then it was just sitting there, not getting him any interest at all once the Fed took rates down to zero in 2020. And so that's when Saylor, obviously, I think people listening to the show are aware of what the journey he went on to find, oh, I think Bitcoin is the best possible asset for me to invest in. So that was the initial tranche. And I think from there, he could have done a number of things. He could have just said, you know what, let me DCA with my free cash flow that I'm generating. Let me sell some equity along the way, and I'll buy a little bit of Bitcoin here and there. But what Saylor did is he really put the pedal to the metal, and he took out, I think it was 1.7 billion of convertible debt. He took out an additional several hundred million of debt that's secured by the software company that they have, and then they've also issued a bunch of equity. So when you're buying into MicroStrategy, the company, and Saylor said this before, you're really buying into the thought that Saylor will leverage various parts of the capital structure in order to buy Bitcoin at the right time and get you essentially, I think that the quote is that kind of gets you a leverage return on Bitcoin. I would say tracking the stock versus Bitcoin, I think that's been accurate so far. So I think what essentially he's done in structuring this company is if you do want a leveraged bet on Bitcoin that is outside of, just, I think it's outside of mining, and we can get into those later. I think there's more work that needs to be taken for investing in mining. That's a more intense examination of balance sheets. That's what miners have, what properties and what locations and what's their, so I think that's very complicated, all the hash rate stuff. But for MicroStrategy, simplistically, okay, we know he's utilizing a big mix of equity and debt to buy as much Bitcoin as possible, and I'll kind of put my faith in Saylor to execute on these Bitcoin buys. To finish up before passing it back to you, I would say, certainly he has bought Bitcoin in the 40s, 50s, 60s. So that average price has gone up from the 10K or whatnot that he originally bought. So I think ultimately, those probably aren't great. But I think he would argue probably that he thought at the time we could go a lot higher and might as well take advantage of the access to the debt markets and the equity price to end up, buying that. And actually, I'll finish at this point too. I think what we saw with the recent loan payoff, that's kind of what we're going to have to see going forward, if Bitcoin kind of continues where it is, because essentially what Saylor did is he issued equity to pay off debt. So he issued maybe 400 million of equity throughout 2023, and then I think 160 million of that was used to prepay the 200 million Silvergate loan. That's essentially the trade that he's going to have to do in a few years, because they don't have the cash flow to repay 1.7 billion of convertible notes, for example. So that's the trade he'll have to do. His market cap right now is about 4 billion. If Bitcoin goes up 10 times from here until a couple years, we'd be happy. He'd be happy. You're looking at a company that's worth 40 billion if MicroStrategy just tracks the Bitcoin price. Maybe it'll do higher than that. But if you're looking at a company that's worth that much, issuing a couple billion of equity to pay off some debt, that's really not a huge deal. I think the problem for him is going to be if Bitcoin doesn't do kind of what the bulls think, it either hangs around here or goes lower, And then you start to get into, okay, what, how can he potentially refinance the debt or pay off the debt, issue equity to do so? He's got a 4 billion market cap now. He's got some debt to repay. Maybe you'd utilize the software business for that. So it kind of gets more complicated. But then what I would say to that too is that the people that are investing in MicroStrategy stock right now, I think probably are in it for the Bitcoin. I would be hard pressed to think that there's many people that are investing in that stock that aren't on board with the Bitcoin strategy. And so if that's the case, I think if you're investing in MicroStrategy, just like you would be investing in Bitcoin, while you do believe in it long term, you're more than willing to say this might end up being a zero. I'm not investing as much as I'm investing what I can afford to lose because it's very volatile. So with that being said, I think it's reasonable if he is selling MicroStrategy as this leveraged model. I think that is reasonable for the end investor to say, okay, I'll invest in this now and I'll take my lumps if it goes down, but I'm betting on the upside if it goes up. So yeah, so that's kind of my thought on it, is that it is sort of a leveraged Bitcoin, and people should just kind of be aware of that if they're evaluating public Bitcoin companies to look at, as opposed to you've got the other options like a GBTC, for example.
Yeah, I mean that's great. And you went into a lot of their Bitcoin holding strategy, which is obviously the kind of controversial aspect of MicroStrategy. But the overall, like the underlying business, how is that doing? How is their cash flow going? Like, is that kind of improving along the lines where they're getting a lot more of this investment money? Because like you said, most people are kind of investing in their stock and kind of holding on to it for a while, because they believe in Sailor and they believe in Bitcoin, so they kind of see it as a leverage play in Bitcoin. So is that helping and benefiting the underlying business of MicroStrategy?
So the business looks pretty damn similar. It looks very similar to how it has over the last few years. I think what they've said is that the benefit that they're getting potentially is that there's kind of a brand benefit where, I mean, I think, like me and you, I don't think either of us probably knew what MicroStrategy was before they bought Bitcoin, right? So, and I think it took people a little while to go, oh, there's a company buying Bitcoin. Interesting. What does MicroStrategy do? So there's a brand effect which could potentially lead to the company needing to spend less on marketing. But I think that would really be the only thing. Maybe there's some benefit way down the line if this Lightning Network development takes off. He talked about that last earnings call, which was interesting, but they're spending so little on that I wouldn't expect that to have a major impact. But yeah, just in general, the software business, I mean, he said this and the numbers prove it out. I mean, it's a pretty sticky business. I think it's business analytics. I think if you're a company that has it, presumably you use it, you like it. It would be tough to switch. I think kind of in software, that's a big reason why people like investing in software, I think, is because a lot of the time it's very hard to switch software providers after you have so much data invested, and you have so much of your business depends on your current software partners. It's hard to actually get away from them. So yeah, in terms of the business overall, I'd say it's very stable, which is good. You wouldn't want it to be declining, but it's just, they're not nearly producing the free cash flow that they would need to pay down, hundreds of billions of debt if it got to that point.
Yeah, and it is interesting that you're kind of putting it that way, but maybe the stability of that business kind of allows them to invest in Bitcoin and kind of have some of their reserves in Bitcoin because of how volatile it is. It kind of balances out in a sense, right? Where you have Bitcoin, the asset that is essentially just up and down every single day, varying in price, but the software business that's kind of slow and steady, kind of chugging up, which kind of allows them to invest in Bitcoin and hold that, where maybe some other companies that are a little bit more volatile, like maybe some tech companies or something like that, they might get a little worried about it. So maybe that's why they've been able to, I guess, hold these the diamond hand, so to speak. But on that note, there's a few things that I want to get your opinion on to see whether or not you think it's kind of, I guess, genuine, or you think it's more of like a marketing tactic. So the whole like Lightning or Bitcoin kind of conference that they have for businesses that they held. I know that's coming up here. I believe it's in May, early May. The MicroStrategy, for those who don't know, MicroStrategy essentially puts together like a business expo for a lot of business leaders, whether they're CEOs, CFOs, kind of higher ups in business, to teach them about Bitcoin, how that can help their business. They had it last year for the first time. And it seems like it's going to be going again this year. I don't really know who the list is. But what is your opinion on that? Do you think that that's kind of an end around way to kind of network with other companies, or do you think it's kind of I don't know, Saylor being the bull that he is and trying to maybe market Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both. I mean, yeah, like you said it yourself, they had it last year, and is there any noticeable change in their business results from it? Probably not. I mean, could it on the margin help them get some customers to them? Sure. I mean, I don't think that's too far out of it, but I think in terms of Lightning specifically, if they are focusing the conference on that, I mean, I do like that idea because so many people that is so foreign to them. So if he's able to sort of teach a lot of new and smart people that are in software anyway, because if you're attending this, you're probably very familiar with MicroStrategy. Maybe you use their products, or you're looking to use it. You're close to deciding to use it. I think those types of minds getting their heads around Bitcoin and specifically Lightning could be really interesting. So I guess I would say I don't think there's any downside to having it. I mean, I really don't, because it takes time to plan it, but he's got a team for that, I'm sure, and there's going to be really smart people there talking about things. But I think there is some decent upside, probably more over the long run. And I'd have to go back. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know for sure, but I mean, was he holding a MicroStrategy World in 2019 before Bitcoin to talk up a software? Maybe. I mean, I think some software companies do that. I know, for a company like Nvidia, right? That's kind of like the hot company right now with AI. They have their Nvidia World, events when their CEO goes up and talks up a lot of the different things they're working on. So in terms of the idea of a company holding a hype event for their own company, this is nothing out of the ordinary, whether it's MicroStrategy, whether it's other software companies, whoever it is. So that's not that crazy. I do like the fact that it seems to be more Lightning focused, because I think that's just sort of like Bitcoin. I think if you get Bitcoin into the right minds, like, it can click for people. I think the same thing would happen with Lightning. So if you get really smart people at a conference, software inclined, to be thinking about Lightning, yeah, I've just got no downside for that. But I think certainly, temper the expectations on it immediately making any big changes to the Bitcoin ecosystem or to MicroStrategy itself.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think like the biggest name obviously last year was Jack Dorsey. So I mean he's already a Bitcoin bull as it is. So I know that there was kind of a list that came out, and there was some notable CEOs, CFOs, and that kind of stuff. But it didn't seem like any other company kind of took the strategy as bullish as MicroStrategy, or even kind of putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet, except for maybe Tesla did coming out of that. But I think that's really it. The other question I have is this gets brought up by a lot of the Bitcoin bears all the time.
Oh boy.
That MicroStrategy has now one, and I think it's every 1 in 150 Bitcoin that's going to ever be in existence. So do you take that as a positive or a negative? And I guess for just the plebs, and as a positive or a negative for MicroStrategy as the entire company?
Yeah, that doesn't phase me at all. I mean, very clearly he's executing a strategy. I think I think I'm surprised that other companies haven't done much Bitcoin. I mean, there's been a few here and there. Square, I'm actually surprised, or Block now, I guess. I'm actually surprised they haven't bought more. I mean, maybe that's Jack sort of leaving some for the plebs, potentially. But I am sort of surprised. Then I would say, on the other hand, look, if you're an Apple, if you're Google and Meta and whatnot, it's just hard to move the needle. So I think the question for those companies, which maybe during the excitement of MicroStrategy, I wasn't thinking of, or Bitcoin people in general weren't thinking of, is, if Meta or Google came out and they bought, 5 billion of Bitcoin and it goes to 20 billion, like, yeah, 15 billion gain would be awesome, right? It'd be fantastic for them. But, Google, Microsoft, those companies, they got 50, 75, 100 billion of cash. It's not a huge change at the end of the day. And they have enough cash where, God forbid, if Balaji's right and Bitcoin immediately becomes $1 million in the reserve currency, then, like, yeah, they can get in on that. And they have valuable businesses where they would still be generating lots of cash flow in a Bitcoin denominated world. They'd be able to buy Bitcoin. So I think the question is the hassle worth it for them? And the answer is probably not, because the regulatory stress that these companies are under is just massive already. So do you want to layer on something in addition to that? I clearly, the answer is no. So I do kind of understand that perspective, but I'm almost a little bit surprised that maybe some of these smaller companies with a little bit less to lose might have gone in and put some on their balance sheet. So that's interesting. But in terms of micro itself, having that much, he staked out an early position in this. That, it is what it is. I mean, how much? We'll at a certain point we'll figure out how much El Salvador has and what percentage of the Bitcoin that is. How I'm seeing on Twitter, people are speculating about Russia mining it. How much Bitcoin does Russia hold? I mean, we definitely knew that there was a lot of mining going on in China for years. How much does China potentially hold? I mean, who knows? Maybe tomorrow, because people have been speculating this about China and maybe Russia to a certain extent, that, oh, they're buying a bunch of gold. They'll come out and have a gold backed yuan. What if they came out tomorrow and said, yeah, our currencies are going to be backed in part by Bitcoin? They could do that. And then I guess the bears would then shift from Sailor having X amount of Bitcoin to, oh, well, China and Russia are using it, so obviously it can't be good. So, like, the bears are always going to have a take on trying to hate on Bitcoin, which is fine. I mean, that's their prerogative. They're potentially missing out on, the greatest invention or creation, or whether you want to call it we found it in human history. They're missing out on that. That's fine. But in terms of one company having all that, look, I think the one point that I would give the Bears, if I'm being totally fair, is if he is a forced seller of the Bitcoin. I don't think that's happening anytime soon. I don't think it will have to happen. I think, look, at Bitcoin 30K or 28K where we're at now, he's got a 4 billion market cap. You can do a lot with a 4 billion market cap, and he obviously already has this year because he's issued 500 million of equity. So if it stays here, I think you're all right. Yeah, if Bitcoin went to 15K or 10K or below that, and all of a sudden the company's not worth that much, if anything, after their debt, that's a big deal, and maybe they'd have to sell some. But I would think, like, from the perspective of sitting here in 2020, in early 2023, when Bitcoin's 28K, if Bitcoin's 10K in 2026, I like, something went wrong there, I think. So I don't think I'd be worried about MicroStrategy at that point. I'd just be worried about Bitcoin in general being that low. So, is that a tail risk for Bitcoin, that a bunch of coins would have to be sold and dumped at a local bottom? Maybe. But I think we'd have other issues to worry about before that. So I'm not that concerned about it. And I think the more Bitcoin that he's buying now, the more valuable the company will be if and when Bitcoin goes higher, and then the less risk you'd have with the company being that valuable. So I think, look, we think it's going up. He thinks it's going up. If it does do that, it's not really going to matter how much they have, I don't think.
Yeah, and no, I agree with you 100%. But yeah, I didn't even really think about the forced selling, but that is a really good point. And it almost kind of reminds me of, like, the bearish point of just, like, what if Satoshi's Bitcoin that hasn't moved since basically Bitcoin's I don't know if you want to call it creation, founding, whatever. The one that holds, I believe I want to say it's like 1 million Bitcoin or something like that. I don't know. It's a ton of Bitcoin that Satoshi holds, and essentially, like, would it cause, I guess, deflation of Bitcoin if we were to essentially just move all those and sell them all off? I don't know. I feel like it's almost kind of like that point, and it's like, well, there's still only 21 million, so maybe it would be like an initial shock to the system, but I don't think it would be anything significant or anything I guess serious against Bitcoin. I think the way the plebs and everybody else kind of stacks their corn. At that point, if it was like a 10K or drop to 10K right now, you see a big bottom. I think everybody would kind of scoop that up, and you just kind of see the steady increase. Obviously, not financial advice or anything like that. But you brought up regulation, and I kind of want to dive into Coinbase because Coinbase has been at the top of a lot of I guess controversy, especially as of late. They've even come out and said because of the U.S. is not very is not very clear on the regulations with Bitcoin and crypto to a lesser extent, but it is a shitcoin casino that they're considering moving overseas. So what do you think about this potential move for Coinbase and as Coinbase's, I guess, balance sheet and company health as a whole, because they've been doing quite a bit of layoffs too, maybe over the past like year and a half.
Yeah, so I think the core, what you have to think about with Coinbase is that if you go through, if you look at their earnings, 2021 was a banner year. I mean, I think they did something like 8 billion in revenue, 4 billion of EBITDA, which is what the street kind of uses for earnings. I mean, this company was firing on all cylinders. I mean, the shitcoin casino was rolling. And yeah, if you look back at that, I mean, Bitcoin gets to 60K, but Ethereum, all these things. And the thing that I always love tracking about Coinbase, because they give this data, is in their quarterly reports, you can see what percentage of trading they break it out: Bitcoin, Ethereum, and then other. So I think it was 4Q21, and people can look this up, but I think it was like 17% Bitcoin, maybe like 30% Ethereum, and the rest other crypto. And now in their most recent earnings, it was 33% Bitcoin. So almost a double, which of course I like seeing as a Bitcoin, not crypto guy. But I think that's like to wrap your head around Coinbase, it's not making that much money off of Bitcoin trading. So that's like point number one. That is, yes, they're providing it, but they do list a lot of cryptos on there, including Ethereum, including kind of the classics that you'd see on CoinMarketCap. So they're making a lot of money from that. And I think what the SEC is doing, look, no one really knows exactly what they're doing, but is it reasonable that the SEC could be questioning, how do all these tokens get listed? Are they securities? What's this yield situation we've got going on? Should that be legislated or under our regulatory body? I think these are reasonable questions. Now, I think there's a couple of camps that Bitcoiners fall into where some say, yeah, crypto is a total joke. They are securities. The SEC should regulate the heck out of them. And I think that's a reasonable opinion to have. And then there's the other opinion that Bitcoiners say, like, let Bitcoin win fair and square. Let's not overregulate crypto in general. Let people lose money on those if they're gonna invest in potentially shit coins, Ponzi schemes, Ponzi yield farming, whatever it would be. Let the people lose money on that. But I do think that from the SEC's perspective, they have a reason to be looking around. I don't think it's completely unreasonable that they're looking at some of these businesses and saying, yeah, what exactly is the practice here? That's not to say that they might, strike against them and make the company put the company in a very tough position. I don't know. I mean, that's up to the SEC. But I do understand Coinbase's perspective too, because Coinbase is operating this business in the US. They've played by the rules mostly, I think. They've worked for more regulatory clarity, and they have been competing against companies like FTX, which wasn't abiding by the same rules that Coinbase was. So I think in an ideal world, there would be some give and take and some compromise where both sides could come to the table, and Coinbase could maybe give a little bit and say, yeah, we're doing some things that should be under more scrutiny from the SEC, and the SEC could say, yeah, you're a US based company, so you should continue to be here, but there's some things we want to look at. Now, there's another perspective here that's just basically if you're someone that thinks it's Bitcoin and no crypto, which I think both me and you are supportive of that, maybe everything is a scam besides Bitcoin, and maybe there should be regulatory actions for everything but Bitcoin. So basically, like all that to say, there's all of this swirling around. So as an investor in Coinbase, I think certainly you have to ding a little bit of what, even if you love the company, regulatory is a major risk. And a company like MicroStrategy only holding Bitcoin, not selling Bitcoin or cryptos, doesn't have that risk. So I think that's important to note. And then in terms of what Coinbase has in their balance sheet, yeah, I think they've got around 4 billion of actual cash. Maybe they've got another billion of crypto in various forms. Some of that's, I think a lot of that's Bitcoin and Ethereum. So the company itself, I think, unless something drastic happens, they will be okay. The thing that they're doing to take all of these jobs away, and this has been very intense. I mean, I would say, them and Meta are probably the leaders in the clubhouse for companies that have taken, done these crazy job cuts. They just grew way too fast because they were growing based on thinking that the 2021 revenue and earnings that they were getting, that would continue on forever. And that just wasn't the case. I mean, it wasn't the case for crypto. It wasn't the case for equity trading. I mean, maybe the image that sticks out to me is the Davy Dave trader from Barstool that stocks always go up, and he's fucking grabbing Scrabble letters out of a bag and investing in these things. Like, he's like, yeah, let me grab 3 letters and I'll buy this stock. So like that was what the 2021 era was, because money was sloshing around from all this printed money. And so Coinbase benefited. I think what they ultimately missed is that this wouldn't continue. And look, frankly, it wasn't only Coinbase, it was a lot of people. I did that. I'm sure you did. Like everybody gets caught up in it because it's hard not to. So Coinbase has corrected. I think there's more cost to correct. If you look at the financial reporting they put out, they are taking some costs down, but there's plenty to go. So they're okay for a business case. I think the ultimate question though is if you're an equity investor and looking at Coinbase, if you don't believe in cryptos other than Bitcoin, I think you really should take a hard look at that 30% of their trading revenues from Bitcoin. And you should take a hard look at, do I really want to invest in a company where 70% of the money they're making is things I don't believe in? Now, if you're listening to this and you're a big crypto guy, I don't know if people will be, but hey, if you want to invest in it anyway, yeah, if you believe in that stuff and you think that the trading of that's going to take off again, by all means, go for Coinbase. We all knew that the stock went to, it went to 400, and what was it, Kramer at 400 said he liked it at higher. So
Yeah, exactly.
it can get caught up in this volatility to the upside for sure. But I think for people probably listening to the show that are more focused on Bitcoin only, there's alternatives here, as compared to just going for Coinbase.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it is interesting about the whole regulation aspect of it. I'm not sure if you saw this, but Gary Gensler kind of went in front of, I don't even know what it was, but it was maybe a hearing or something along those lines. But he was asked whether or not like Ether, the Ethereum token was a security or not, and he essentially like, couldn't answer the question. And so it seems like regulators and the SEC and everything like that, they're getting kind of frustrated with the way that the overall crypto industry is going. So as somebody, I guess, say you're a Coinbase investor, or I guess somebody who's just like looking at the company or analyzing it, do you think that this is like a huge negative as a company that's based in the United States, where the SEC seems to be kind of getting frustrated, it seems like, with the lack of regulation, and the fact that that Coinbase is like threatening to move its headquarters outside of the United States? Do you think that that would be a positive move for Coinbase, or do you think that that's I guess a little bit worrisome?
Yeah, I think it's definitely worrisome. Yeah, I mean, if they feel like if they feel like the environment is so bad that they have to move, yeah, I think that's a major negative. Now, does that mean they could be more flexible in what they operate? Sure. And it's actually, I hadn't thought of this before, but I guess because I'm thinking about FTX, VCs were investing highly aggressively in FTX, but it was all private markets, right? They weren't public. So I guess I would be I'd be curious of what would happen to Coinbase's public, SEC registered U.S. equity if they did end up leaving the U.S. and what would happen there. So I think that would probably be a big step to figure out for them. But I mean, I would like to think that they're probably bluffing a little bit, and they're kind of, I mean, they've been shown what they do, those Twitter threads where the legal officer kind of fights back against the SEC, and Brian does that too. So I'd like to think it's a little bit of bluster, but look, frankly, I'm not even sure where I fall on this debate of whether I think what Coinbase should be doing is illegal or not. I mean, look, like I'm a Bitcoin only guy. I think the rest is shit coins, but and should I be there saying that companies should be selling this? I don't know, right? So I'm not really sure where I fall in that debate, but I think what I can say is that there should be clarity, and maybe the SEC is, I mean, to give them the benefit of the doubt, they're studying this, and they would try for more clarity once they've actually figured out their position. But they should know by now how they feel on this. And if they do know how they feel, that should be communicated to Coinbase ahead of time, so that maybe Coinbase only like, what if Coinbase only sells Bitcoin and Ethereum, for example, as an extreme case, and they didn't sell anything else. Like, I don't know if that would happen, but that should be something that the SEC should be communicating to them, and frankly protecting investors too, because I think Coinbase, they have a 12 billion plus market cap. There's a lot of people that are invested in Coinbase. So if and this is not just retail investors, there's institutional holders of Coinbase too, of 14 billion. There's institutional holders of Coinbase too. So those investors should have information as well on, if there's big revenue and earnings generators from Coinbase that are at serious risk from the SEC. They should be aware of that. Now, I guess you could call the Wells notice that Coin got is kind of a warning to potential investors, and the stock certainly sold off after that. So that's part of it. But I mean, I'm all for communication, finding the truth together. I think there's room for compromise between both Coinbase and the SEC. I don't particularly like the path Coinbase has gone. I've had arguments with people over. They've said, "Oh, Block or Square should support selling shitcoins," and I say no. Like, they should. They only like selling Bitcoin. They want to do Bitcoin. They'll do that. There's plenty of Bitcoin only companies, and so look, like, if at the end of the day, if Coinbase has to stop operating in the U.S. because it's selling too many shitcoins, I mean, that would be probably a very big short-term negative. But other companies could pick up the slack here, and there's plenty of Bitcoin-only companies selling Bitcoin in the U.S. So, yeah, I think ultimately there should be more regulatory clarity. There's not, and I think that's one of the biggest issues that I have, not only with crypto, but just sort of the regulatory situation in general, and this is for all companies, is that it's never clear. So a company can have a game plan, and then the rug's pulled under from them in 6 months, and then all of a sudden, they had the 3, 5, 10-year game plan, and they can't do that anymore. So in all fairness to Coinbase, and again, I'm not a huge fan of them just because of what I'm not a huge fan of them selling all these shit coins. In fairness to Coinbase, they should have some guidance, and hopefully they will get that. But with this SEC and with government in general, I'm not really sure you can trust anything.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, about the SEC not being able to trust them, because I feel like, if Coinbase were to move offshores, that would make me not trust them, because, you've seen, like you said, it would essentially allow them to kind of just run wild and be almost a shitcoin casino. I mean, I think that there's a reason why, you see some of the bigger exchanges like FTX and Binance and some of these other ones that are overseas and that don't really operate too much in the US. And I think part of that is because the US, like, SEC restrictions are a little bit more strict than, say Europe or some of these other countries. And, like I said, because of that, FTX US, for example, was a pretty small arm of FTX as a whole. Like, obviously, what happened in that whole situation was not great. And having a bunch of, US celebrities, sponsor FTX and FTX Arena and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's a full another rabbit hole we can go down. But, Coinbase, if they were able to move off of, US and kind of get out of that regulatory background of the SEC, it seems like they would be like essentially able to operate with more flexibility. But I think in this space, that's not a good thing. I mean, do you agree on that point? I mean, if you still have Bitcoin on Coinbase and they leave the U.S., I don't know what you're doing. One, you still have it on there, but two, I would get it the hell off.
Yeah, I think the SEC needs to figure it out. And what I would use as a comparison. And look, I'm not going to say I know this exactly because I don't think anybody living in the U.S. does. But what I have heard described in China is that companies like Alibaba, Tencent, JD, the big China tech giants, essentially what happened is they were allowed to grow pretty much unfettered for 10, 15, 20 years since the internet kind of got up and running, and that these were companies that, they were going for it all, right? Alibaba was this massive company selling all these goods all over the place, getting a delivery network, logistics network, doing media, doing data center and cloud. But there came a time when the government said, okay, this was a couple years ago, we've let you guys grow and unfettered for a while. Now we're going to lay down the law and regulate you guys more aggressively. And so they did that, I think maybe call it from 2020 through 2022. And I think now we're seeing headlines in 2023 that they're kind of easing off the gas pedal. So they felt like maybe for 2 years, they got rules together to, I think another example of this is Didi, which is their basically version of Uber and DoorDash together. And with Didi, there was personal information that this company had, and China wasn't happy with how they were storing the personal information. And so that was a big issue with the Chinese government. So I think we need to take a page kind of out of that playbook, ironically, being in the US, is that look, Coinbase, they they were allowed to be formed. They grew for a while. They went public and they were, they're doing all these things now. If the SEC wants to step in, they can, but let's have rules of the land. Let's legislate them. And it's not like we need to throw the company out. We don't need to bankrupt them. We don't need to send them away. We just need to regulate them based on what we want to have for future regulations. And I don't, if you like, look, if you look at Chinese equities, yeah, they take a pretty they took a pretty big leg down, but these companies are still standing, still producing free cash flow, still expanding. Alibaba now is breaking into several companies, but that plan was supported by Jack Ma, their founder, and I think the stock was up after that plan because they think each of these different types of companies can be more focused and can invest more. So yeah, I just think there needs to be better communication for what's going down. I think what we've had for the last couple of years is just sort of dumb on both sides. Like we need to know what the lay of the land is, because otherwise you're going to have more stuff like this, and you will have U.S. companies moving overseas, and that's just going to be a negative for the country.
Yeah, and it definitely seems like, companies are going to go where incentives lie. And it seems like, countries like El Salvador, for example, are making it very, incentivized for companies to come down there and operate in El Salvador. I know if, you're an internet company and you're based in El Salvador and you don't sell anything in El Salvador, they're not going to charge you any business related taxes. So, Coinbase, for example, if they move down there, they don't have to pay any business tax, but they could still operate in the U.S., of course, if they, yeah, I mean, through their app and all that kind of stuff too, which is kind of like an interesting little tidbit. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. But, we brought it up a little bit earlier in the conversation. I want to get into the Bitcoin miners. We don't have to go into any specific one, any specific miner balance sheet or anything like that. But, we talked about MicroStrategy and their strategy of basically, purchasing Bitcoin and holding it. But, a lot of miners kind of gained popularity in the 2020 to 2021 time where, Bitcoin was ripping, where they would just hold on to their Bitcoin that they were mining instead of selling it off to, gain cost. And then now, they're essentially mining at a loss. and they're going to have to, sell off. And some of them are capitulating, not to a full extent where they're all having to sell off all their corn, but very few of them are still stacking that Bitcoin. So, on these strategies of, obviously not holding any Bitcoin, just holding Bitcoin by buying and holding Bitcoin by mining, like, how do you view these three different strategies as, somebody in traditional finance, that for, I guess, like a company's reserve strategy, so to speak?
Yeah, so I think with Bitcoin miners, there's a couple issues of their kind of game plan in 2020, 2021, where yes, they definitely were they were holding, they were not selling. And I think the profit margins these companies were making was, I don't know exactly, but I think it was 70, 80, 90% margins, because they were mining at a cost of 6 to 8K per coin. And at a certain point, the coin was 40, 50, 60K. So instead of pocketing at least some of that margin and maybe saving for a rainy day, or trying to kind of build up some cash on your balance sheet, I think that's reasonable to do as a public company, especially if you're a public miner. They kind of went the other way, which is, yeah, they kept all the Bitcoin, and they also either took out debt, issued equity, or both to buy miners at prices that obviously now you could get them for very little. And we have seen there's been distressed sales of mining machines. So you've had companies that were a little bit more thoughtful about how they use their operations and selling some. They've bought miners at significantly reduced prices from companies that probably had taken out debt or issued equity to pay for. Now, I don't totally hate, because I think there's an argument for both sides of it. If the mining, like there were just some crazy moves in the mining equities, like Marathon. I think everybody kind of know, like that just was insane. I think that at one point that stock was 80, and it went maybe to like 5 at the lowest, in the recent bear market. So that was just incredible pricing. So there's an argument to whether you want to be selling equity or selling Bitcoin. I think you can do both, but if you sell the Bitcoin, then you have cold hard cash that basically are you're generating from your operations. If you sell the equity, you can keep your Bitcoin, but you're selling equity to what people would call the fiat maxis, right? You're selling to BlackRock and to Vanguard, and to retail investors too, but you're selling to institutional investors that down the road, if there are important decisions to be made for your company, like how ESG do you go? Do you want some of these funds owning 15% of your equity? Maybe you don't. So maybe there's a mix of, okay, if your stock kind of gets egregiously priced to where if you take a multiple of their earnings with Bitcoin at a certain price, take the Bitcoin with the two, and if it's out of whack, then maybe you do sell a little bit of equity. But I think there should be a mix of selling some equity, selling some Bitcoin, keeping some Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And so if we do, it's an all-weather scenario. So you always have a little bit of each, so that worst case scenario, you're trying to avoid selling at distressed prices, whether that's Bitcoin itself, whether that's your miners, and whether that's your equity. You don't want to sell all those at distressed prices. And on the flip side, you don't want to be essentially buying any of those at sky high prices. You don't want to be buying the miners at sky high prices. You don't want to be holding onto all the Bitcoin at a sky high price and watching it fall 50%, 75% of value. So, look, it's easy for me to say this from the cheap seats, because I wasn't I wasn't running a mining company at the time. And, did I personally think that there is a potential for S2F to be more accurate than not, and for us to go 100, 200K plus? Sure. I mean, who, like that, when Bitcoin's ripping thousands of dollars a day and it's above 50K, anything's possible, right? So I don't totally, from the personal perspective, I think people could get caught up with it. But I do think if you're a public company and you're running a miner, I don't think there's no excuse for if and when this next bull cycle comes. There's no excuse to put the pedal to the metal completely and then put yourself in a position where if it crashes again, you're going to be in a rough position. You've learned from the past. You need to be having a rainy day fund of cash. You probably should have some Bitcoin, but you shouldn't be selling. You shouldn't be holding on to all of it. And do not take out a bunch of debt at sky high interest rates like a lot of these miners did, backed by mining equipment. Don't do that if you don't have to. Just sell equity, sell a little bit of equity instead of doing that, because debt at 12, 13, 14% is crazy. So yeah, that's my take on it. But and again, if anyone in the mining business is listening, my suggestions, I'm not at a company, but ultimately from the outside looking in, that would be my take on what they have done and what they potentially should do the next cycle.
Yeah, and I actually have like a little bit of a different opinion when it comes to mining. I think that miners should just distance themselves from the volatility of the asset, like as a whole. Like, I don't know if they should really keep much at all Bitcoin on their balance sheet, just strictly because of, the volatility of the asset. So when you're able to, mine and get those 2 to 3 times, profit on whatever you're mining, like, why would you want to keep that? I think that, holding essentially like a decent cash position for Bitcoin miners is just, I think the smarter and more conservative route, because of, just one, how volatile Bitcoin is as a whole, and how difficult it is to mine Bitcoin at a profit, especially during bear times. So, being able to hold all that cash, and instead of taking loans against miners or kind of doing some leverage plays on their Bitcoin and other things like that, I mean, Bitcoin mining as a whole is just risky in general. So doing all that stuff just adds 10 times more risk than they really need. And I kind of look at it similarly to like maybe oil miners or gold miners. Like, you don't really see gold miners or oil miners kind of hodling gold or hodling oil, and so they try to distance themselves from the volatility of those assets that they're mining. So I think that Bitcoin miners should do something similar. But, obviously, if you're in a Bitcoin mining business, you are bullish on Bitcoin. So it's kind of hard to say that, like you said, from the cheap seats, because I am bullish on Bitcoin. And if I were to, personally get a miner, I would probably hold on to that Bitcoin instead of, paying down the electricity costs with it. But I'm also not running like a large publicly traded company. So it is kind of, tough to say here. But yeah, like I said, I kind of think that, just holding Bitcoin for miners is tough. But I do agree with your points on, buying it and holding it. If you're able to have a cash position already on the side, like, why not? What's the hurt? I mean, I think you could only really get some benefit. Like, it's kind of like a retail investor. Only invest like whatever you're willing to use. Obviously, don't, FOMO everything into into Bitcoin if you're, a large company, and put your whole cash savings and everything like that. But if you have some room to spare and you can invest it in Bitcoin, like, the potential payouts, I think, obviously outweigh the risks.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And look, I think the risk to getting too aggressive with selling your equity. Yeah, it's just that's eventually going to come back to bite you. So I just think there has to be a balance. I do see your point where because you're already exposed to Bitcoin, now you're basically doubling your exposure by holding the Bitcoin. And then especially if you borrowed off of that, then it's a leverage double exposure. And if you look back to what Saylor has a slide in one of his MicroStrategy presentations that kind of outlines why people would invest in MicroStrategy over Bitcoin miners and over others. And he does say that a benefit of MicroStrategy is that you do have software exposure that's a solid business, and that's not what the mining business is, which is obviously very volatile. So yeah, I definitely get that. But look, I think as we all know, as we all saw from the pricing, that leverage on the double volatility has extreme upside in a Bitcoin being up scenario. So certainly we all know that as retail investors. I think certainly the institutional holders know that too. And I always kind of, when I see miners being up huge on a day, like more than they normally would be with Bitcoin, there's always kind of a thought in my head of, all right, like somebody knows something, and some of these big funds are, and this is just my theory, I don't have any evidence behind this, but what I think is, like, all right, some of these big funds are just like, get me, I don't even care what the price is and how much is up today, just to get me some Bitcoin exposure, because I think Bitcoin's going to take off the next week or month or so, and I just want it now. So, whether that's right or not, I don't know, but that's kind of what I always think about when I see these miners up like 20% in a day when Bitcoin's up 3%.
Yeah, that's a fair point. But you've been very generous with your time. But before I let you go, we got to do a little chart boy kind of talk here. How do you think about the overall price? I mean, we had a little bit of a dip today. We're recording on 420, so unfortunately the price isn't as high as everybody else. But we're sitting at 28.2 maybe 28.2K. So where do you think we're going? Obviously, we're all bullish, like listening to this. But the past 5 days we've had a little bit of a slide where we went, this business week or whatever you want to call it. We've seen essentially like a 2K drop where, we are now seeing under 30K. So, where do you think we're going from here? Do you think we've hit the bottom and we're just, this is just a blip in the radar, or, do you think we're going to go down a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've had a nice run here. We had a nice fun run up to 30K. I think maybe we hit 30K, or we're very close. So can we pump the brakes a little bit? Sure. I'm not that concerned about it. I think the ultimate concern, short term Bitcoin, I'm not concerned about this myself personally, long term, but I think short term, is if we have a recession. I mean, because if we have a recession, if we're in one, stocks decline, risk assets decline. As much as we like Bitcoin, as much as we think that it is the future, it will be correlated in some part to risk assets in the short term. One of the biggest, I just loved seeing this, was when Bitcoin took off during the bank crisis. That was amazing. That was kind of, even the Bloomberg fiat supremacists had to say that on their terminals. They had to say, yeah, Bitcoin is proving out the thesis of the bulls, because it's an alternative to the banking system. So can we, as the banking system recovers, can we give up a little bit? As recession potentially is more likely, can we give up a little bit? Sure. So over the short term, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't do a ton from here on out. But look, I think to think about it longer term, we got a halving coming up next year. If we're in a recession, we got lower rates coming up easily. I mean, come on. I think at a certain point, we're just going to have to do it. You hear about Elon Musk talking about there might be a Great Depression soon. Whether or not he's in the right, I don't know, but certainly it looks like there could be a very much weakening economy. So they're going to have to cut rates eventually, and the market is pricing in rate cuts for the second half of the year. So I think as we get more liquidity into the system, as we get closer to the halving, as we just get more excitement in general, that feeds on each other. Look, I think there will be another cycle. I mean, there's no reason for us not to have another cycle. So I think in the meantime, for what I do and what a lot of people do, and I think what's the easiest is the set it and forget it DCA. Whatever you're comfortable with, whether it's a tiny little bit, and whether you want to ramp it up or down depending on if you're close to a milestone, or whether you're coming into more money, or whether you're more bullish or bearish depending on what you think, if there's a recession or not. I mean, it's up to the buyer, of course, but I think ultimately something that is consistently getting you in the market, in the game, so you can benefit from the lows and then kind of enjoy the highs and not be worried you didn't buy too little. I think that's the best play. So yeah, as for an actual prediction, look, I ultimately, in my job, I'm a fundamental analyst. So, if technical analysis worked, I'd be out of a job. So I can't make a chart prediction, but I can make a long-term prediction, which is the fundamentals look extremely strong over the long term. And so I'm in it for the long term.
Yeah, SB, that's awesome stuff. And it's always a blast to talk with you, whether it's on spaces or podcasts or whatever. But you also put out some great content. So why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and what you got going on?
Yeah, so we're the Woke Antidote is the podcast, and look, I mean, if you like Bitcoin, I would say we definitely talk about Bitcoin. At times, we talk about the economy, but it really is kind of what I said in the beginning of the show. It's an examination of the world from the point of view of a couple of normal dudes around 30, kind of looking at things going things are kind of strange out there. Things are kind of weird. Sometimes we get serious and we talk about, do some deep dives issues. We talk some tough subjects. Like we did a show after the mass shooting, so we went into the details there and some mental health, the crisis in the country and what we should do about it. But then we also like having fun and joking about stuff like never drinking a Bud Light again. So we I think we do the best of both worlds. People have enjoyed it so far. We continue doing it, and get pop us a follow on at the Woke Antidote. That is the what I have up there. And then give us a follow on Twitter, and we'll be dropping shows. We don't have an exact set schedule, but like we like to do maybe one a week or so. We've got a nice archive there, and you've been on one as well. So we'll at a certain point we definitely got to have you back to talk. But yeah, we'll have guests from time to time too, and we like having fun and talk about interesting issues.
Yeah, for sure. I'm always glad to come back. And my rant on LeBron, just as we're going through these playoffs, dude, is just frustrating me even more. So if you need me to come back on and just yell about that, I'd be more than happy to do that. But SB, thanks so much for coming on, man. And I'll have to have you back on again. I mean, I have you on the program a few different times, but we'll always a friend and always a great conversation. So I really appreciate it, man.
Love it, man. Love to be here, and yeah, let's hope Bitcoin after this brief pause kind of continues going back up.
Amen.